Hello, I'm Brother George from the Community of the Resurrection at Mirfield, and Mirfield Publications have just published this book, The Tissue of His Kingdom, by John Rodwell. And John and I are going to have a conversation about it.
Well, thank you, George, and it's very good to be back here at Mirfield because, as we may see from what we're going to say to one another, part of my story began in this place. So I have written this book very much as a result of that initial encounter with the community and out of the fabric of my life, which has played itself out since then.
Yes. I have just read the book and I was unable to put it down for various reasons which will become clear. But the book has a series of short chapters, each of which begins with a picture of somebody or a human situation, a lot of it from earlier on in your life, and then out of that something from the essence of the gospel is drawn in what I think is a very beautiful way. John has a gift to say things with insight and a twinkle in his eye, with a slight touch of naughtiness. The first thing that strikes me about it is that you're talking about ordinary people's lives and their funny ways and the gospel. And I have thought for a long time that the saving events, as they are described in the scriptures, are a key to everything, and particularly the incarnation, Christ's ministry, his cross and death, resurrection and ascension, and the coming of the Holy Spirit. It's a key to everything. That key formula of the saving events through the life of Christ and what followed are there everywhere, all around us and in daily life and in the ordinary things of every day, and they can lead us to the gospel.
Yes, that's very true for me, George, and I think one of the things I want to communicate in what I've written here is the fact that in Jesus we see that our flesh and blood, the ordinariness of our own bodies, of yours, mine and everybody else's, that stuff can bear the burden and glory of the divine, and Jesus shows that forth. And therefore this transforms our understanding of all that we are, whether that is seen with a mischievous eye or with compassion, which understands the foibles and frailties of human beings. All of the situations which we find ourselves in, these are riven with the knowledge that the very stuff of our being has been thought worthy of God's inhabitation in Jesus. And that for me is a central point of what I want to say and of my belief.
And your belief goes back a long way. As a young man, you weren't a churchgoer, but you ended up as a student at Leeds, and you ended up in the Hostel of the Resurrection, which was a hostel that my community ran for students in Leeds. And on the first Saturday evening, you went to the chapel to solemn evensong, which is to a very beautiful and ordered service, and something happened.
Yes, the most important thing in my life happened, really. As you say, I was a sporadic churchgoer. I'd been a tuneless choir boy, and I'd been confirmed, but the Hostel of Resurrection was a complete eye-opener to me. I applied it as a sort of counterfeit, really, because the hostel had a few spaces for paying guests, so-called, among all the ordinands. And the paying guests were supposed to be devout young Anglican men, which I couldn't really honestly describe myself as. But there was a sort of divine revenge in this, actually, because the moment in Solemn Evensong was transformational for me. And you could say, yes, it was aesthetic, the beauty of the music, the incense, the servers' robes, the beautiful vestments and so on. And that may be true, but underneath that, was a feeling of being known, of being instantly and thoroughly known by by God, and a realization that I had not, as it were, come to faith at that point, but that his presence was already there in my own life, and that I was valued before I knew it, and that my response would be to recognize that divine desire. And divine desire is very important for me, because I think that our life, the situations we find ourselves, are riven with divine desire, if only we could perceive it. So that moment in the hostel was the moment when I first perceived it, and it was in a way everything to me. But of course, my understanding of its significance, the unravelling of it in my own life as I've gone on, has been continuous. So there wasn't a moment of conversion, as one might put it in that sense, but of the beginning of a sort of pilgrimage of understanding about myself and my worth, and communicating that for everybody who reads the book. It is that's really what I want to do. I want people to see that that's true of them, whoever they are.
Yes, and throughout the book, it's clear that for you, for God, we mean everything, and he seeks us out all the time. He's waiting to find us.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and it's the recognition of that, the fact that he is there already and all ready for our response. So that sense of his waiting is hugely significant, because if it's unperceived, his longing is unfulfilled for you or me or everybody.
Yes. And while you had that experience in going to church, you don't need to go to church in order to find God, because God is already there in your life all around you.
Yes, God has found you. That's the finding God is secondary. It's realising that he has found us. That's crucially important. And of course, I think church going is very important. I'm a priest. I've been a priest for 50 years. I happen to have worked as a worker priest, as an ecologist at the same time for those 50 years. But I'm very convinced that the celebration of the church, of the presence of God in worship, is hugely important as a recognition of the fact that the very stuff of what we receive in the Mass, the bread and the wine, is a sign of this generosity of God, that it stands for, symbolises, is the celebration of the fact that we are part of the body of Christ, and our flesh and blood were worth taking.
The church today is very concerned about mission and evangelism. Do you think that this concern for mission has something to learn from your experience at Solemn Evensong then?
I may say that the church was very slow to recognise the value of the sort of worker priest ministry I thought I would like to pursue. But for me, it's been crucially important. Mission and evangelism are very important, but I didn't want to be a worker priest so as to evangelise the people with whom I worked. That I wasn't concerned primarily about converting them in that sense. I was concerned to show that a priestly presence, some kind of recognition of the church's presence, was very important in the place that I worked. So my model, my aspiration was to be like the French worker priests after the Second World War, who disappeared into French society effectively, but were a living recognition of a priestly presence in different work situations, and that was my hope. And that significance, I thought, I hoped, would be persuasive as an explicit sort of campaign of mission to win them over for membership of the church of which I was a priest.
I presume that one of the reasons why you tell us so many engaging stories from the 1950s and a little bit afterwards is that, looking back to another time, you can see a bit more clearly things that people couldn't see themselves. And in our own time, there are things we can't see ourselves. And looking back to that world of Barnsley in the 1950s, you paint marvellous pictures with a twinkle in your eye of the worlds we construct for ourselves. For instance, your mum and her obsession with being house proud and the cleaning. And all those funny rituals which people had, like scrubbing their doorsteps with Dobie and trying to outdo each other in doing it well. Or a story you tell about people used to hold tea parties in which they gave the cakes which they'd baked. But somebody went to one where they put out bought cakes, and this was thought to be terrible. And obviously all that looks rather narrow and pointless. But on the other hand, here you had ordinary people who had through time constructed a world for themselves which had a pattern and structure and made sense and enabled them to live their lives within this structure. And they aren't simply to be sniffed upon, are they? These are old practices. Now, obviously, things like that had to change. But when you look at our modern world, those kind of things in life are being rejected, and it's presumed that we can float free, absolutely free, and be free spirits. And what does that give us? We end up with a lack of focus, lack of roots, and a lack of sense of direction and who we are.
Yes, I wouldn't want people to think that the book was a sort of exercise in nostalgia. It was simply a celebration of these peculiar worlds from which I, and you actually, you were in Leicester, I was near Barnsley, from which you and I grew up. So it's more than that, but certainly, yeah, it is a way of looking back on the particular aspects of my own life, which gave it shape and which happened to give it security and happiness, actually. It wasn't a simple life, it wasn't an easy life always. And I'm very aware, of course, that many people's lives are not of that character when they look back. They were lives which were broken, which had abuse, which had neglect and so on. So I'm very aware of that. But I think I would agree that these structures gave us a sense of shape and, very importantly, I would say, a sense of belonging. And I think a sense of belonging is hugely important for people. And in a society which is as mobile as ours, that's not so easy to find, because societies have changed dramatically, social structures have changed, families have changed, human relationships have changed and so on. And some of that is beneficial, of course. We're more open, we're more welcoming to people of different character to ourselves, of different backgrounds, but nonetheless, I still think a sense of belonging is really important. The Bible, all the prehistory of Christianity with our forebears in the faith is about belonging and about the fact that God reveals himself not generally in a free-floating way. He reveals himself in particular places with particular people, and the church should be committed to helping people to celebrate this sense of belonging, and it should provide them with a sense of belonging, which is not an alternative. The church is not an alternative to where people live. It should be deeply embedded in the societies in which people live. Maybe in a parish system, maybe in other ways, maybe in religious communities. But certainly that sense of belonging is really important, and we need to think about it carefully, especially in this age of rapid forms of communication and artificial intelligence, which can construct places which don't really exist.
Yes. And one thing that comes over to me from the book is various ways in which growing up in that more restricted and simple world, in fact, prepared you for being an international scientist, if I put it like that, and a priest.
Well, that's an interesting idea, because my parents were, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, of course, but my parents were very simple people and pretty complex psychologically, actually, but my parents really had no ambition except to nurture a family and to earn a crust and put food on the table and live a bit longer than they actually ended up doing. But no, their ambitions were fairly limited. And of course, my trajectory was very much the classic working world boy, in that education cut me free from that and gave me the opportunity to have a career, which my parents sadly were not able to celebrate. They died before I found my way into the world of scientific research and so on. But yeah, it did prepare me, but I think the experience in the hostel was, in a way, the more fundamental preparation, because it gave me something I could safeguard. I can't really imagine an alternative world to the one I've lived in, I mean, my career, but I think whatever had happened to me, I hope that what took place in the hostel would have gone on being of crucial importance. But I think the more I've got grandchildren now, and what one of the reflections is concerned with the way in which grandchildren envisage me and my wife, and I hope that their world will be as enjoyable and secure as ours has been. I worry about that, of course. But if we can fit them for that world by giving them the sort of security that we enjoyed, then that would be great.
I've hardly touched on the great riches, I have to say, of your reflection on what God has in store for us, what God is trying to enable us to receive and to enjoy, and what makes for a life which is real life. And I wonder if there's any theme in the book which I haven't raised, which you, which is important for you, and part of your writing of the book.
Well, I suppose a lot of my writing, and some of it on the margins of theology and science, has been concerned with my professional world, which is ecology. Ecology is the study of the oikos of creation, that is the household of creation. That's what the Greek word means. And I believe fundamentally that the natural world is a gift from God. The sacrificial generosity we see marked on the body of Jesus in his wounding is the same sacrificial generosity out of which God made all that there is, making room for something that is his but not himself, which is very risky, and places upon us a huge charge of responsibility to care for what Pope Francis has called our common home, the oikos, which we share with all creatures. And one of the reflections explicitly, and a couple of others in an oblique way, try to make reference to this fact that our own lives, our human lives, are the lives of just one of his creatures, among which we find ourselves present.
Thank you. You do have a beautiful writing style, I have to say, and it's not just a writing style, it's the way of thinking and looking into things that goes with it, which I find very engaging throughout the book. And there's one passage that just caught my eye, which captures some of it, and I'll just read it. The search of our memories and feelings, with all their jumble of joys and pains, helps us to discover that thread of dependency on the world and on our friends, and to celebrate our belonging here, in a place which God yearns should discover its origin in him. They're all woven up with God. And so to close, I'd like to close with the quote you put at the very, on the title page of your book, from P.T. Forsyth. God's object with us is not to give just so many things and withhold so many. It is to place us in the tissue of his kingdom. There it is.
Thank you, George.